In the previous videos, we talked about the different specific research designs that are all considered true experiments. Another thing that's common in all the previous designs was that all of them are called independent groups designs. Independent groups design. Why? Because the participants in the control group are different people from those in the experimental group. However, in some cases, we know that it can be costly because that means there are a lot more participants you have to recruit. And another thing that's a disadvantage of the independent groups design is that there are most likely a lot of individual difference variables that may create noise in your research. And so, one design that could solve that problem is what we call the repeated measures or within groups design. So, in the within groups design, what happens is that the participants in the control group are also the same participants who will go through the intervention in the experimental group. Now, you might wonder, sorry for that noise, but you might wonder, how do we do that? Okay, so say for example, you have three participants. So say you have three participants, okay, and you're using a repeated measures design. So what's gonna happen is, may I still apply the three features of an experiment, true experiment? So what are those three features? Those three features are, oh sorry. So those three features are, first you have manipulation. Next is comparison. And the last one is randomization. Okay, so can you still apply those three? So how are we going to go about doing this? So first, do we have comparison? So yes, because these participants who are originally in the control group will also be assigned to be in your experimental group. So check. Will the participation be randomized? Well, what you can do is randomly assign them into either the control or experimental condition through a process called counterbalancing. So, the term is counterbalancing. Okay, and it's a very popular concept of ABBA. So, check. And then, will there be manipulation? Yes, because when your participants are assigned in the experimental condition, the IV of the study will also still be manipulated, right? So, how does that work? Let's go back to our experiment on journaling. So, remember that in our experiment, we wanted to see whether journaling right before exams could prevent or minimize choking among test takers. So, choking, high choking, or the presence of choking would mean low scores in an exam where a student actually prepared, where the absence or low choking would mean higher scores in an exam where the topic has been something that the student has actually studied. So of course we most likely should have done the preliminaries, so we make sure that the students have studied and prepared for the exams, and then we sit them in front of their test papers. So how are we going to do this study if we do a repeated measures design? So let's say you have Anne. So Anne has prepared days before the exam. She's covered all the topics she's supposed to study, and now she's ready to start the test. So what we're gonna do is we are going to toss coin and decide whether Anne will take part in the control or experimental group first. So based on our toss coin, it says Anne will start with the control group. So first, control group. So that means she's going to take the exam without journaling. So what's going to happen is she will go straight to take the test. Okay? And then after that, what's going to happen is Anne is going to have to sit through an exam, but before that, she will then journal first and then take the test. So let's make sure we don't forget Anne's face. Okay. So yeah. So basically, here you can see the components of your true experiment. So there's comparison, there's a control condition, and there is an experimental condition. Okay. So there is a comparison. And then there's also the element of random assignment because we randomize this through a coin toss. And there is also still manipulation because in the experimental condition, we introduced journaling prior to test taking, right? So that's how repeated measures design works. Now, depending on the number of conditions you have in your study, this could be longer. This could take longer, definitely. Now, one problem that can result from this kind of design is called fatigue effect. So, of course, you know what fatigue is. For very long experiments, like let's say, for example, if you have 5 different conditions, that means a student has to take 5 exams. Eventually, maybe at the third, fourth, or fifth exam, maybe the student is really just too tired to keep on answering and concentrating. And so when we get a low score in some of the later conditions, then you have to wonder, is it because of the kind of intervention given in that condition, or is that really because of fatigue? And this is where the randomization also helps, because when you select other participants, so let's say Tom may start out with the experimental condition and then follow through with the control condition. So if you have different participants starting out and performing the conditions in a different sequence, that sort of balances out fatigue effect. And again, that's what we call counterbalancing. So some students will start out with a control, some students will start out with the experimental condition. One problem, though, that may be a bit harder to eliminate in the repeated measures design is what we call is what we call the order effects, right? So in cases like that, so maybe let's say the participant does not know the true aim of the experiment. In an independent group design, it's pretty easy to conceal that to avoid like demand characteristics, because the participant is exposed to just one condition. He or she doesn't know what's happening to other people in another condition. But in this case, It's pretty easy to see what the aim of the experiment is because you're exposed to all the conditions. So you kind of figure out what the researcher is trying to manipulate in the study. And so that can influence the way you think about the research and how you should be responding as opposed to just your normal behavior. And the last concern is about practice effects. So, say you need to participate in this kind of study. Now, in some cases, when you start out participating in an experiment, you're a bit nervous, you're a bit anxious, you're still getting used to the feel. So maybe that'll influence your performance in, say, an exam. But as you go through the items, and especially as you take the second exam in the next condition, you might be more start to feel more comfortable about the whole thing. And so it might in some way improve your performance. And so if your score increases in the second exam, then we have to ask ourselves, is this because of the intervention, let's say, or is it because of you getting used to the activity you were asked to make? And again, this is something that is solved by the counterbalancing that we do, or the random assignment and the random arrangement of the sequence of the experiment.